Wow. Okay, back to Hawaii momentarily. In the meantime, we've got a debate coming up, and we've got a huge weekend in the state of Iowa. Former President Trump says first he will not sign a loyalty pledge to support the Republican primary winner. That is a final requirement to take part in that debate coming up in 13 days. 8 candidates so far have met the polling and fundraising requirements to get in. 2 have signed the pledge thus far. Former White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Fox News contributor Karl Rove with us now. Karl, good morning to you. I mean, Jordan's story is gripping. Really just stops you in your tracks. And he's just one of thousands and thousands of people who are living that life right now. So, Karl, good morning to you, and thanks for being here. Saw your piece in the Journal this morning. You write this, call for number 1. If I were a betting man, I'd say Mr. Trump shows up. He simply must be the center of attention, but no one knows now, probably including Mr. Trump. He may decide at the literal last hour. So you're on record as saying, thumbs up, he'll be there.
Well, I said if I had to bet.
Okay.
And of course, that was before he last night proceeded to say he's not going to sign the pledge that he would support the nominee of the Republican convention. And that's big news. It's got implications for the immediate. It means that unless he signs that pledge, he's not going to be in the August 23rd debate. But if he were to become the nominee, he's now given license to any skeptical Republican who is concerned about his behavior on January 7th or his exaggeration and lies about having lost the election, having won the election. He's now given him license to say, well, you know what? If he wasn't willing to commit to support the nominee of the Republican Party, I'm not obligated to either.
And so Chris Christie said this. This might not be a huge surprise. He was on Special Report last night about Trump not showing up at the debate. Watch it.
If he doesn't show up 2 weeks from tonight, what it will show once again is what he showed throughout his presidency, was a complete disrespect for the people. The only good thing for me will be, I'll have more time to speak because he won't be droning out about his 3 indictments with a 4th to come.
But Karl, it seems like President Trump's supporters, they just stick with him through thick and thin, indictments or no show. Do you think it will really matter?
I think it could. There's a new poll out that suggests that of the 50-some-odd% of Republicans who now support him, that a significant number of them, approaching 50% of those people, would not support him. 45% of them would not vote for him if he were convicted by a jury in one of these trials, which means that the hardcore that he has inside the Republican Party is about 29%. Now, that's a big number compared to everybody else, but it is hardly a majority. We don't know how the next 4, 5, or 6 months are going to play out, but the former president has a number of significant challenges, and missing on the debate. Look, think about this. At the debate, there are 3 good reasons why not to show up. He's ahead in the polls. Why why put himself in a place where he gets a lot of pot shots from the others? He is today. He's the guy who draws attention. So more people will watch it if he's there. So why build a crowd for his primary opponents? And finally, he could say things that plunge him into more legal difficulties. So there are lots of good reasons why not to show up. But on the other hand, he could look like he's either weak, he's afraid to show up, or more likely that he is not really, he's overconfident. He's taking his supporters for granted. And the attacks are going to be tougher if he's not there. They're going to go unresponded to. That's going to have an effect. The other candidates are going to be able to turn the conversation to what they want to talk about, not what he wants to talk about. And
Karl, can I interrupt you real quick? If you're those other candidates,
yeah.
I'm just thinking, do you want him there or not want him there? Like, if you're trying to make a name for yourself.
Yeah, look, you got to plan for either contingency. I think none of them are sitting there saying, God, I hope that he shows up, or God, I hope that he doesn't show up. They realize that's outside of their control. If they're smart, they're preparing for both eventualities. What if he shows up and what if he doesn't? How do they handle themselves in each of those 2 scenarios?
Karl, nice to see you.
Lots to think about.
Yeah, it sure is. Karl Rove there. He's not in Austin today, so he is on the road. Rove is on the road. We should go on the road with Rove.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.